This is the Digital Marketing Experts Podcast episode. No, why am I trying to sound like a radio announcer? Experts in the Wire, episode 87. Alexis Sanders. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 87 of Experts on the Wire. My guest today is Alexis Sanders. She works with a company called Merkle, which we're going to hear all about what they do and their fancy SEO tools, which I actually use and like myself. And we're going to chat a lot about voice search, duplicate content, structured data. I'm really excited just to jump right in. But first, I want to mention real quick, I have kind of an interesting sponsor for this episode. They're actually a headphones company. Now, you might be thinking, like, why are you going to sponsor a headphones company? I'm going to tell you all about that, but trust me, when you hear the sponsor spot and I tell you all about a company called Studio halfway through this show, you're probably going to want to use the discount code that I'm going to tell you about and go try one of their products. I've been using their headphones now for 3 months and absolutely love them, but we're going to chat more about that later. First, let me introduce my guest, Alexis. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks so much for having me on the show, Dan.
Absolutely. I am very excited to talk about voice search and structured data and all that stuff that I know my audience out there loves as well. But first, I want to get a little bit of your backstory. It seems like you kind of landed right at Merkle very quickly after finishing school. Was that intentional? Did you seek out a job like that? Did it just present itself right away? I'm curious how that happened for you.
Yeah, definitely. It was all a little bit of luck. When I was back in college, I ended up interning at Merkle in our main office in Columbia. And that was way back in 2009. And then in 2011, when they had acquired Impact, and I was actually looking for a professional job in Pittsburgh, I kind of just landed there in search. And actually, originally, I had interviewed for a paid internship, so to work in SEM, but just I guess random chance I ended up coming over to the good side, you know?
And you do have a background in marketing from school, is that correct?
Yep. I have my bachelor's of science in business.
That's right. And it's funny, a lot of my guests and a lot of SEOs don't come from a marketing background. I was a musician. Yeah. I have a worthless classical piano degree, right? Like you can't get a job
not
from
worthless.
That.
That's cool.
In the job market, it's kind of worthless. Like it's very hard to get a job with that degree. But point being is it's interesting because some people on the show have come from that marketing background in school, and some it's completely unrelated. I always like to hear the backstory. Since that happened for you, what would you recommend to someone either fresh out of school, or maybe they're in school, or maybe they're thinking about looking for a new opportunity to attract and to find a great position like you did for yourself?
Wow, I have so many recommendations. I think, first off, applying for a lot of jobs. I think they say statistically you have to apply for 60 jobs these days coming out of college and then do 12 interviews. The second, I'd say make sure to prepare for the interview. So if you're really interested in getting a job in marketing, start reading Moz, start reading Search Engine Land, start reading Search Engine Journal, show an interest, learn things, make a website, do something with WordPress. It doesn't have to be necessarily complicated. It just has to show that you're really passionate about learning and passionate about what we're doing in marketing as well as SEO.
Yeah, that's a really good point. One thing that I found is like a lot of people that want to get into SEO, they've never even built a website. And that's something I recommend, even if it's just setting up a simple WordPress website. That's a great way to get some quick experience. For anyone not familiar with Merkle, what is Merkle? What do they do? I've seen the name a lot. I know there's some tools. I feel like I think maybe there's some consulting involved, but I'm not really sure. So help enlighten us. What is Merkle?
Yeah, definitely. So Merkle typically services Fortune 500 companies, and we support these brands in obtaining competitive advantage through what our executives call people-based marketing and performance-driven analytics. And really what this comes down to is that Merkle started off as a very data-centric company. These were people that were dealing with big data, and not just like the phony big data, like the legit big data of major companies. I mean, they had so many statisticians on staff. It's insane. It's really fun to go down to the Columbia office. And in about 2011, with their acquisition of Impact, they started getting more into the media business and acquiring media business firms. Impact focusing a lot on search, and then eventually that acquisition of RKG, which is a very prominent search company, as well as Audit Media. And so in terms of Merkle, we have such a wealth of intellectual diversity from people who are really into data and statistics of that, to SEO, to PPC, to display. Merkle really runs the gamut, which is really, really fascinating about it. And then in terms of SEO, we're kind of like a really small cog in this gigantic system that is even part of a even more gigantic system, which is the Dense Aegis network. And our site, technicalseo.com, I'm really glad you've got a chance to use it. But yeah, we try to create some tools that are open source and free for everyone to use. And one of my favorite parts about it is that we really don't collect any data on it besides what you'd get from a Google Analytics. So you can feel really comfortable using those tools.
And so does Merkle provide consulting? Do you have clients and is that the core of the business is providing consulting?
Yeah, I'd say for at least the media side, it's consulting. So some of the other stuff that they do is manipulation of data. They build databases for major companies. They house databases. A lot of our Chinese business started off as a lot of database building. Very
interesting. And there's a few known people that work with Merkle in the SEO world. Is Adam Audette with Merkle?
Yeah, he is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's awesome.
Excellent. So I'll link to everyone we mentioned in the show notes, by the way. So as a technical SEO manager at Merkle, what does your day-to-day look like? Are you working directly with clients? Are you consulting? What's kind of your role there?
Yeah, so I never know what to expect, which is kind of the fun part about all of it. And I actually have a very unique mix between the technical team and client services. So probably about 80% of my time is with clients and focusing on strategic client initiatives. And then the rest of my time is spent answering other people's questions on our team that relate to technical issues that they're having. And we're so lucky that we have such a really smart team that a lot of times the questions that bubble up to our tech team are really, really challenging to answer. And I guess I'm under the guidance of Max Prin as well as Kyla Becker, and we kind of work in sync to answer those.
And do you sort of work one-on-one with clients? Are you dealing with clients directly?
Yeah. Traditionally for the tech team, it was kind of a very centered role where a lot of other SEOs would come to our team, but I kind of have a very interesting position in there where I'll interface with clients for the most of my time, and then for the rest of the time, I'll be focused on answering those questions that come in.
Excellent. So as a technical SEO, I want to ask you about some tools that you really like besides the Merkle's tools. Yeah. I know a lot of people listening to the show are interested in technical SEO. So what are some tools, maybe a few that are even off the beaten path, so to speak, for technical SEO that you really like?
For technical SEO, one of my favorites is Uptime Robot. It's kind of like a lifesaver. And essentially what it is it just pings a site continuously, and you can set the intervals in which it pings the site for. So let's say, for instance, the site is down for 5 minutes for whatever reason, or the robots.txt is down for whatever reason. That's one of my favorite ones. User agent switchers, I think a lot of people are really familiar with those. So any version of that, so you can check to see what exactly Googlebot is seeing, or for instance, if you're really interested in what's going on in Bing, you can look from BingBot.
Let's jump back 1 second to the Uptime Robot. I think that's interesting. Yeah. So what is an application? What are the reasons why you're pinging a website, checking to make sure that it's up? Obviously, you want pages to be working. You mentioned the robots.txt file. What's the importance of checking that to make sure that's up and running all of the time?
Yeah. If your robots.txt goes down and then you start to see, or for instance, if you start to see some pages getting indexed that shouldn't be, you can go back and check. It's also something that you can be really proactive with your clients about. So for instance, if your robots.txt is down, or maybe your homepage is down, you can be like, all right, we got to get a 503 up there, a 503 status code that is, or a splash page that says, hey, we're down right now, but we're actively working on this.
So it kind of alerts you to something you need to take action on. I like that a lot. What are some other tools for page speed that you like to use?
Besides Page Speed Insights, which just came out with some new stuff.
That's really, really great what they came out. For anybody listening that doesn't know, tell us what's the new addition in Google Page Speed Insights?
Yeah, so they just added first content pane as well as DOM content pane, which is pretty cool. And essentially just kind of shows you a better visual of where you are, which is really neat. And
from what I understand, they're pulling real user data from the Google, if I get this correct, the Google Chrome extension experiment lab, something or other. I'm not sure the name, but they have real life data from people using your website. So just for kicks, I plugged in npr.org just to see how they came up. They came up with a excellent score, meaning that real users in real life have their site has loaded quickly for them. So that's really cool too, because it's not just the test that's sort of like a proxy for how you're doing. It's actually real data gathered from Chrome. That's what I understood from it as well. So very cool stuff. Some other page tools, because PageSpeed Insights, it's from Google, but what are some others?
And one of the things about PageSpeed Insights too is like for a very long time, like the 1 to 100 scale was really arbitrary. So it really didn't tell you that much. So that's really exciting that came out. So it's just top of mind. Some of my other favorites, I think probably the best out there is probably webpagetest.org, which is also like a Google initiative. But they just give such detail. You can go back and bookmark specific pages. And they also have this new integration with Cloudinary, which is probably, I guess, a year old now or something like that, but which hops you into showing image optimization, which has been like a really popular thing in the last year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that tool a lot. I didn't know that Google was involved with webpagetest.org.
Yeah. I think actually Pat Meenan had talked at Tech SEO Boost, and he's one of the creators. So. Oh,
interesting. Okay. Cool. So many things are Google related that you just have no idea.
Yeah, right. And then some of the other ones that I really like, GT Metrics, I think is really cool because they pull in from a bunch of different APIs, which is really neat. Google Developer Tools obviously has like a lot of really cool things. Their new coverage report is really cool. And of course I say new, but I feel like it's probably been out for a year or two.
Sure.
But basically for the coverage report, it essentially shows you like when you're loading a page, how much JavaScript is actually being used versus how much is unused. So like, for instance, if you see that like you're loading a page and there's all this JavaScript that has to be loaded in, but you're not using any of it, like why is it there? Is it because this is like a global JavaScript file and it's needed for a bunch of different pages? So it just allows you to audit the site a little bit more.
Very interesting. And for the listeners, we're still sort of talking about your background, your day-to-day at Merkle. These are some of the tools you use. Yeah, I'm curious. I like to tell the listeners where we are on the roadmap of the interview itself. We're going to get to duplicate content and voice search and all that stuff. But I'm curious where you got your technical background, because I know you went to school for marketing. I don't know if it was a technical form of marketing, but you definitely seem to have a good understanding of page speed and JavaScript and everything. So did that come from did you self-teach that? Where did that come from?
Yeah, a lot of it was self-teaching, but also, I mean, like you said, like working with Adam Audet and also with Jody O'Donnell. Jody was like a really big mentor to me, as well as Max Prinn, our current head of technical SEO, have both been really strong mentors in my career and have pushed me to learn certain things and given me books that are way too challenging for me to read and just kind of push me along. And anytime I don't understand something, I'll like send them a tweet and be like, I don't understand what's happening here. Can we break it down? Can we run an experiment? Can we see what's actually happening? I mean, I think that just having those mentors and just trying to actively and aggressively learn has helped out a lot.
That's a good lesson for we talked about finding a job, but for anybody considering jumping into the world of SEO and marketing, if you're trying to decide, do I get a job? Do I work in-house? Do I go freelance like I did? I think you made a great case just now for why going in-house or agency is great, because you have these built-in mentors.
And at Merkle too, we have like a really great educational program, which probably even about like 5 years ago or 4 years ago when I had started, it was more of like you have to jump in, you have to get hands-on and learn everything yourself. But with the acquisition of RKG and the acquisition of all of that like intellectual diversity and knowledge and interest in like so many different fields. You kind of alluded to it when you said that you had a piano background, so it's almost more of a creative side to it. But there are so many people who have more of a development background. So people have different interests, and being able to pull from that collective knowledge is really beneficial. So we have I think our training program is about 4 to 5 weeks of straight training.
That's excellent. So
cool. Yeah,
we're going to chat about duplicate content. And you just recently published an article on OnCrawl, which is another tool that I love, by the way.
Yeah, gosh, I feel like there's so many tools. When you asked that question, I was like listing out like so many. There's a website by one of the guys who just finished the Technical SEO Expert Challenge, Saijo George, and he has this webpage. I'll send it to you, but basically it just shows like the breadth of SEO tools. There's so many.
Oh, excellent. Definitely share that. I think that's one thing for anybody and any listeners out there, one thing needed in this industry is a little bit better organization of the tools out there that exist. I mean, I've thought of myself of creating a resource of all of these tools, or at least the ones mentioned on the show. There's so many. And I think almost like a search engine of tools, not to get meta, if you will, would be a really valuable resource for this industry. There's just so many tools. But OnCrawl, you wrote this article about duplicate content and strategic resolution. I like OnCrawl a lot. One of my clients has been using them for over a year for log file analysis. Some really great features. But in terms of duplicate content, this article really jumped out at me. And I wanted to ask some questions I wanted to ask some questions. It's definitely one of the most thorough articles on duplicate content that I've seen, because most people now, I feel like when we say the words duplicate content, and maybe the listeners out there, your eyes kind of glaze over. You filter that word out a little bit. No pun intended there, but it's kind of like we just throw around this phrase duplicate content and it's lost its meaning. And what you've done really well here in this post is really picked apart and broken apart all of the different types of meanings of duplicate content. You have a really interesting stat in the content about how many pages on the web are duplicate. What is that stat? How many pages on the web are actually duplicate content?
Yeah, so one of the books that was actually recommended by Barry Adams was Introduction to Information Retrieval, which is a textbook that Stanford uses for their intro class. And I thought this was a really interesting way to approach this. But one of the chapters is all about resolving duplicate content from an engineer's perspective. And one of the things that the writer mentions is, by some estimates, that about 40 pages on the web
40%.
are 40%, yeah.
Wow.
Not just 40.
Yeah. And 40% is quite a lot. And so,
yeah, you think about just multitudes and terabytes of data that Google's crawling every single, 1 terabyte every 72 minutes or something, which is probably way more than that now. But
wow. And that book again is what? And I'll link to it in the show notes. What was the name of that book again?
Introduction to Information Retrieval.
Okay, sounds great. I recommend everyone really serious about SEO is learn about information retrieval. It's sort of the geeky way to refer to what search engines do and what they are.
Yeah.
So according to Google, can you define duplicate content? What does duplicate content mean to Google?
Based on their webmaster guidelines, they say it is substantive blocks of content within or across domains that either completely match other content or are appreciably similar. So coming back to this idea that it doesn't just have to be the exact same thing. It can be highly similar.
And so I understand you have a little bit of a beef with SEO tools that use duplicate titles. I think you put that here in the notes. So I'm wondering, because I have the same frustration with SEO tools that have these reports and then they spit it out and it's, oh my goodness, you have 200 pages with duplicate content. And that can be misleading, right? Yeah,
definitely. And I think too, you have to really look at what factor is important to you. Obviously, with titles, title tags are really important for on-page optimization. But I think what really matters at the end of the day is, are each of your pages answering the user's questions, and is that title relevant for the particular page? So for instance, if you're covering something on the page that has a similar topic, but you're covering it in a different way, does it make all the difference in the world if the title tag is the same? Probably not. It's more about the actual information that's shared on the page.
Do you think those reports are helpful, hurtful, useful in any way? The ones that say you have, duplicate page titles, duplicate descriptions, they cause more, what I find is they almost cause more problems than actually solve problems. What's your feelings on that?
I think you can definitely get really freaked out by something like that. And especially the one thing that I really, really love about OnCrawl is that they also look at the canonical clusters, which I thought this term was so cool. I'd never heard it before. I had seen the reports. But essentially it means that let's say you have two different pages that are live, one with a .html at the end and one without a .html at the end. So one with a different file extension, but one canonicalizes to the without the file extension, then that's not really a problem in terms of search, because search engines can go through and look at that and say, oh, this is fine. Everything is okay. I know which page to index. I know which page to rank. Everything's okay. But if you don't look at the data through those lens, you're like, oh my God, I have like 7 title tags, and it's just absolutely insane. So
they might even,
I definitely think that was a really, really good value add that OnCrawl has.
Maybe they filter out HTTP and HTTPS and www and non-www. That's a really good value add. Yeah, because those duplicate titles are not problematic. That's what Google would call technical duplicate content, I believe, which is more of it's not a malicious content stealing. It's more just, it happens because of a technical reason. So should the listeners or their clients be worried if they have, quote, duplicate content? Does it cause a penalty?
No, duplicate content in and of itself does not merit or cause a penalty, which I think for the most part, that makes intuitive sense, because a lot of times it's not necessarily people's fault that duplicate content arises. There's a plethora of reasons that it could be happening. And sometimes it could just be that the content's really super similar. If you think about it from like an e-commerce perspective, like page 1 is going to be pretty similar to page 2 of like a product category catalog. So I thought that was really an interesting insight that John Mueller came out with, and I think he had said this in like an October Google Hangout, but basically that it's not in and of itself a penalty. However, things like scraping other sites, spam content, or even things like doorway pages, those kind of duplicate content elements may cause a penalty, but it's not because it's necessarily duplicate content.
And so what are the problems caused by duplicate content? If it's not a penalty directly, what are some of the issues that can arise?
Yeah, I think the biggest one is probably keyword cannibalization, where essentially you're competing with yourself to rank for particular keywords. And a lot of times with keyword cannibalization, the biggest issue is that you're kind of like diluting your efforts. So let's say, for instance, you get 10 links from companies across the web, 5 go to one site, 5 go to a different one, and you're not consolidating that effort. It's kind of like almost like wasting your time. Whereas like you could have had twice the impact with this one consolidated page with all of those links pointing to them.
What is the impact on crawling when it comes to duplicate content? Does that cause issues when it comes to crawling?
I guess that would depend on like the size of your site in terms of like, and I know like Google had an article, I think it was like last January, about crawl bandwidth and like how they perceive that. If you're a smaller site, you probably don't really have to be worried about crawl bandwidth. But like, let's say you're like in e-commerce with like hundreds of thousands of pages. Like if you have hundreds of thousands of pages and then another 100,000 pages that are all the same, I mean, it's definitely wasting Google's time.
Google did come out with an article, and then I interviewed Vanessa Fox about crawling, because she wrote an article going way more in depth than Google's article. She used to, of course, work at Google Webmaster Tools, and so she has a really good insight there. So I'll link to that episode in the show notes.
Did you see the Portent article that came out probably like 2 or 3 days ago by a guy that it's like such a cool experiment where he like visualized the different crawl paths that you had to go through with rel, next, and rel preview. It was just really cool.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I saw basically everyone I follow about SEO that tweets about SEO sharing that article. I did not click on it and look at it because I know based upon the tweets and the title and everything that it's going to be a bit of a rabbit hole of an article when I click on it. So the article you're mentioning is, I believe they tested different types of pagination and how it impacts crawling and SEO.
Yeah.
So,
and it really just creates like some really cool artistic visuals, which is just it's really cool. So definitely check it out.
Excellent. I will link to that in the show notes as well for anyone listening that has not checked out that article as well. So in your OnCrawl article, there's probably a few dozen types of, nuances to types of duplicate content that you list out, everything from pagination to printer-friendly pages to facets to sorting. Depending upon your site and your scenario, you could have a whole swath of different types of duplicate content. But what I want to get to here, and then we're going to get to the sponsor spot in just a minute, is what are some ways people can think about resolving duplicate content issues? Let's break down a few of those.
Yeah, I think at the highest level, you want to think about your strategy. And I think that kind of comes back to this idea that you don't want to be repeating content on different sides of the site. So there's always like technical ways to resolve issues for certain things. But at the highest level, you want to make sure that your content strategy, everything kind of has its place, which is one of the biggest areas. And then after that, if duplicate content does arise from like a technical issue, knowing the proper methodology for resolving that. So there are multiple ways to resolving that. There's canonical tags. If it's pagination, rel next prev. If you want to block those URLs from search engines ever crawling them, like in terms of like the robots.txt disallow statement, or even no index them with a meta robots or no follow. Or if you don't want bots to be allowed to see them, like with a 403 stats code or with like some sort of server pass code. There's always ways of technically resolving those type of issues, which is really cool.
In the article, I'm curious about the bullet that says knowing your user journey. What I'm wondering there is, that sounds like a very marketing like piece of advice, like know your user journey. So connect the dots for everyone. How does knowing the user journey help with a technical issue like duplicate content? Definitely.
So I think when websites were originally created, for the most part, if you think about it, a lot of them were probably created, I don't know, in the early 2000s by someone that wasn't thinking about scalability, and they weren't thinking about information architecture. So you'll see a lot of websites on the internet today that you think, wow, like this isn't really intuitively organized. There's information in multiple sections that's kind of similar. There's not really a flow to it. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that way back in the day, there's no way that you could conceptualize of how big some of these websites and infrastructures were going to get. So I think a lot of that comes back to, it's actually almost kind of a technical thing too, to like go back and kind of really empathize with what your user's going through in that moment and try to figure out how you can best reach them with each content type at that particular moment and where that should live within your information architecture.
Yeah, I like that answer.
But that kind of takes a lot of like creativity too. So it's kind of like that weird mix that SEO has of like that right brain and the left brain.
Absolutely agree. And to me, site architecture and these issues we're talking about are some of the most challenging and problematic issues when it comes to SEO.
There was actually a really good book that I had asked on Twitter what books people had recommended. And Barry Adams had commented that one of his favorite books of all times was a book on information architecture. And it's one of the Riley books that has the polar bear on it. And it's a very classic text. This is like the 4th edition. You look like you totally know what it is. Yeah. But he talks about in the book, he's like, there's no one right answer. And that's what makes this so complicated. There's always a different answer for each particular way of approaching it. And in the book, they give like so many examples of like really good information architecture that really works for those brands, whether it's Apple or Mayo Clinic or whatever it is. But it doesn't really, but there's no canonical answer to that, which kind of is the unfortunate and a creative aspect of it. There's always and that there always may be a better answer out there.
Yes. There's been a lot of tweets that I've seen in this year. A lot of people seem to be tweeting about, I'm not going to call out any names. One person said, let's not talk about ranking factors anymore. Maybe you saw that tweet. And then somebody else was saying,
no, we should talk about that. We should talk about links. No.
Yeah. No. And then there was another tweet, I think, I wish I could remember, but there's a lot of, I think there's a danger in stating something as a black and white. And you insinuated this a minute ago, there's no one right answer. So
yeah, it kind of goes back to like John Mueller being like, just be awesome. 2018 ranking factor, be awesome.
Right.
Which is it's kind of like a beautiful thing too, because it's kind of like almost like as an individual, it's like, just be you, be you and be the best you that you can be,
right.
Which is kind of, but you can't quantify that. So that's the frustrating aspect of it.
Absolutely. And I think with just to tie a quick little bow on the ranking factors thing, I think you just need to know where to put that in its place. Yes, study ranking factors, but understand that there's a time and place to apply your learnings from ranking factors and to even care about those at all. And then there's other situations when you're doing SEO where you shouldn't care about ranking factors. You should care about the inputs to what creates the ranking results that you see with clients. It's something I want to write about a little bit more, but let's talk about
I'd love to read that blog.
Yeah. Let's talk about my sponsor for today's episode, Studio. And for the listeners out there, you're listening to a podcast. And so that's one of the biggest reasons that I wanted to mention these headphones by the company called Studio. I'd never heard of them before, but they reached out to me. They said, if we send you a pair of free headphones, will you mention them on your podcast for 2 episodes? And I honestly wrote back and I said, my listeners are the number one thing to me, and the trust that I have between myself and the listeners and my guests. And I said, if you send these headphones to me and I don't like them, I'm going to tell you and I'm going to send them back and I'm not going to mention them on my show. Well, fast forward 3 months, I still have the headphones. They're right here. I opted to get these wired earbud headphones. I actually sat down with my Apple headphones, these studio headphones, and I think a pair of Skull Candy headphones, and I compared the sound to them. So I was a musician and I really like sound. I do sound production. These studio headphones, which are only $90, sound better, obviously better than the Apple earbuds. Those kind of sound terrible. But they sound better than any other $100 to $200 price point earbud headphones that I've tried. And they look great. Like they feel like a luxury headphone, but they're only $90, which is very cool. And they come with all of these accessories. You've got like 4 different earbud sizes. You've got like a fancy leather pouch. You've got a clip so you can clip it to your shirt so they don't fall out of your ears when you're doing things. I really love them, and I've been using them for 3 months. And if you're listening to a podcast, chances are you're probably using headphones at some point. So they gave me a discount code. It's Dan Shure, DANSHURE. It will give you 15% off any product. They have wireless headphones for running. They've got wired headphones. They've got big headphones like you have, Alexis. They have all kinds of headphones, and you get 15% off any one of their products with the discount code DANSHURE. So check out Studio. Let's chat a little bit about finding some duplicate content. You mentioned some tools here. What are some tools that we can use to find duplicate content?
Definitely. So if you're looking for duplicate content on your site, I highly recommend checking out OnCrawl. I think with their canonical clustering and some of the reports that they have, which they just have these amazingly stunning visuals, that they're a really good place to start. After that, I mean, obviously Google searches. So if you're looking for the cheapest option, a Google search is definitely the way to go. You can do some site searches. You can look at some of the in-URL searches, which if you want to go with the cheapest way, that'd probably be the number one way. Other than that, I think I found a lot of value in looking at keyword density tools. My favorite being SEO Book's keyword density tool, and which you now have to log in through their domain portal, but it's actually free, so that's not really a problem. And sometimes when you're able to check those density tools, you can kind of get a different visual of like what's important within the content, which I think is very valuable, because if you start to see all of their pages are about one topic, or if you're checking out Tag Crowd and you're looking at these word clouds and you're saying there's only one word that's showing up here, maybe I'm talking about this topic too much, or maybe I should expand on some of the other things that are related to this. It just provides a different insights there.
I think it's important. Something you just alluded to that I want to directly address is duplicate content isn't always literally you're copying the same words and it's the same thing on the whole page. You could be cannibalizing content as well. You sort of alluded to that. Like, talk a little bit more about that. Why is it a problem if maybe you're a content publisher and you're writing too many articles about the same topic? How can that be problematic?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm all for content hubs. So I want to caveat with that. But I kind of think in the article, I had this analogy to that scene in 10 Things I Hate About You, where Google's kind of looking at these two different pieces of content and kind of like, all right, what's the difference? Kind of the same situation that Bianca was put in, where Joey shows up to her and he's like, do you like this pose or this pose? But they're exactly the same pose and one just has a different color t-shirt. You got to imagine that search engine bots are probably going through the same thing. They're like, well, like this piece about like eggs is really great, but then this piece also about eggs is really great, and I'm only going to rank you for eggs once. So like, which one should I pick? You know, because they're both appreciably similar. And then you can come into like interlinking, I guess, would be a good way to deal with that. But
I had a client that took the notion of when Google talked about, freshness is really important. And a lot of people make the mistake and they take this idea of you need to have fresh content, and then they think that means you need to publish articles over and over and over and over and over again around the same topic. So this client was publishing a gift list about something. And so what he had done is every year he did a gift list, same topic, targeted the same keyword. And then you go to Google, you do site, and then like in title, gift list, and his topic. And there were like 10 articles, all basically about the same thing. So that's another way you can find topics that maybe you've been cannibalizing yourself with, several articles that are really targeting the same topic. And what you should do is consolidate those down back into one page. Pick the one that's ranking the best, and then consolidate the rest down. Great.
Definitely. So, and that kind of comes back to like this idea of like e-commerce brands having Black Friday sales every year. It might not be the most efficient organic SEO idea to basically have a Black Friday 2017 or Black Friday 2018. It might just be more efficient to have Black Friday, keep that page live year round, and have like a splash page that says we'll be back next year. So that page can acquire links, and you're not really having those issues of like search engines looking in and saying like, oh, should I rank the 2017 Black Friday page or the 2018?
I agree 1,000%. For all seasonal content, I always recommend keeping a static URL with no date, and then just changing the date on the piece of content year after year when it gets updated. I think in the article you mentioned a content matrix, specifically a retail content matrix. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so my specialist, Abby Hamilton, and I were looking at different strategies relating to personas, and then we have this other strategy that had to do with duplicate content. And I thought it was really valuable in basically breaking out where the content should live and just allowing you to visualize some of that stuff about information architecture, which tends to get really, really complicated really, really quick. And what it comes down to is essentially having two axes, the X and Y axis, that have different things that are meaningful. And then in terms of that, if you're going to have something like, I don't know, like in e-commerce, typically things like that would be informational to conversion oriented searches, or non-brand to brand, or do-it-yourself versus an expert, people who are proactive versus curious, and essentially just mapping out everything to really give you an idea of like, what are your priorities for content? Should we be focusing more on the higher converting content that's brand oriented? Where do we have weaknesses? And I found that it was a really valuable exercise to do for my client, and it allowed a deeper understanding of the site, where users are in the funnel, and where we were focusing our attention and where we should focus our attention, which I thought was really interesting.
So to create a retail matrix, do you just need 2 data points and then like a tool? Do you put it into Excel? How do you actually create the retail matrix?
Yeah, so I really just created it in PowerPoint. And essentially what I did is, and you can look at the visuals in the On-Crawl blog, but essentially I just mapped out, I actually used hexagons because for some reason I really like hexagons. And I just wrote out the type of content that it was. So we had a health client, and essentially I would say like, all right, where does our hospital content go? Where does our service content go? Where are we focusing our attention with non-brand on? And just map that out in terms of the service matrix, which we chose the proactive versus reactive, as well as do-it-yourself versus search expert. In terms of like, if you're looking for more of like a traditional product selling brand, or like an e-commerce, you're probably going to be more interested in, are these users researching generally, or are they more interested in conversion? And are they searching non-brand or brand stuff?
I see. So you're kind of you're strategically choosing the 2 things you want to compare based upon your goals. And then you're gathering the data. And I'll link to the On-Crawl article, of course, in the notes. But it's a simple graph that looks like a cross.
Nice little Euclidean.
Yeah, with the 4 different aspects on that. So I'll link to that in the show notes as well. Now, I want to chat about voice search. And actually, since I've researched for this interview, voice search has exploded even more since the beginning of the year. There's some huge developments in voice search from Google. And so, but let's kind of step back to the beginning. So you have a great video about voice search as well. John Mueller asked the SEO community how they would use voice search data in Search Console. He asked this on Twitter a few weeks ago. And my answer, and maybe I'm just not, this is why I invited you here, is because you've got some great answers I can see in the notes. But my answer to John was, well, I don't know if I'd really use voice search data in Search Console. So sell that to me, right? What are some uses that would be valuable to see in Search Console around voice search data?
Definitely. And I 100% saw this thread on Twitter because it was really big. And obviously it had like 50 comments or something. And I know I really wanted to participate in it because I was like, oh, like I have all these ideas, like I'm so excited about it. But I ended up not participating on it because my opinions were so conflicted about it that I felt like, I was like, oh, like I don't know what I can add to this. So on one side, like I guess minimally, like I do want to see like what snippets I'm ranking for. I think that would be a really good value add that Google has. So from that perspective, I think that would be really useful. I think some of the tools that are out there, Bright Edge, Data Cube has a whole feature for that. Conductor has one as well. But occasionally, like I'll notice things that maybe like they'll say you have a snippet, but you don't necessarily have it. So I think it would be really good information to have it coming from Google, because if you think about it, the results are probably different for a lot of different people. And so like if they're saying that it's ranking for a snippet somewhere along the lines, there's a chance that it's ranking for that. So I think that would be really useful. And the rich results feature.
And when you say snippet, is that because that's what Google's using in the voice search answer?
Yes, exactly. And I think the rich results is a really cool feature that they have in Google Search Console, but I think it's just not covering it, which is unfortunate. And from one perspective, I'm really just curious generally for voice about like what users are asking, like how are they asking it? Perna had a great article in Moz a few years back, essentially saying like that voice searches tend to be longer. Like, is that necessarily the case? Like, it makes sense that it wouldn't be. It makes sense that most people would use natural language queries, but is that what's actually happening? Like, what is the consumer behavior? And I think all of that would be so fascinating to see. But at the same time, like, I 100% agree with you. I think Google's on the back end, like looking at this data, like, how are we going to normalize this? None of this makes any sense. Like, you have one person asking about like one thing one way that's like said in a certain way, and then someone else is asking it another way, and it's not really that useful. And so how are people going to ultimately use this? And I think from that perspective, like, do we want data that's not normalized that we're never going to use, and then have that responsibility of having to then report on that kind of stuff, which would be frustrating. And then on top of that, I think there's also a privacy component to this, like, which obviously Google has to deal with way more than we would have to deal with. But what are search devices randomly picking up? I know I have a 3-year-old niece that is obsessed with Alexa. Sometimes she calls me Alexa, I think to be condescending, and tells me what to do. But do I really want like her voice to be picked up and then recorded with certain information that may or may not end up somewhere? You know, I think that's also another issue that they're probably dealing with. Like, what is additional that's getting picked up in those queries? Which, I mean, voice search is obviously getting better, and their word accuracy rates are getting good, so they're kind of understanding that more, and I'm sure they would pull out a lot of information from that. But nobody wants to have that kind of crisis on their hand where something shows up that shouldn't be in an analytics report. So I think, honestly, like, I'd almost want to see what they're seeing, because I think that would be more insightful. And I don't really think I have a way of making up an opinion until like, or to even realize whether it's useful or not until you see it. But I'm so with you that like, I just don't know like what actually they want to have on the back end. So
I agree. To me, that I share the same opinion. It would be interesting, but what do I do with it? So I know I ranked for, Yoast SEO versus all-in-one SEO, and somebody spoke that versus typed it. Okay, great. Now, what do I do with that information? And to me, I think what's interesting and what Google just announced at the CES conference is these speakers that now will visually display to you your answer. I believe. I don't know if you saw this. It just came out.
I know Alexa has screens now.
Right. Yeah. Cool, so Google's partnering with speaker companies like JBL and maybe Bose. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, or listeners, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Point being, though, what I'm more interested in is knowing is what is the output, right? So what is the device? Tell me all the searches that happened on a Google Home. Now that's interesting, I think, because now I know that's
super cool.
Yeah. Just like in Search Console, we can segment by mobile, by desktop. We can see we can see searches that had snippets at all or not. But I think knowing the output device would be way more useful as a way to segment that versus just, oh, this query was a voice search. Okay, was that on desktop? Was it on a mobile phone? Was it on a Google Home? That to me is much more interesting because now I know if somebody's searching for, how to tie a bow tie and it's with a Google Home, okay, well, that could tell me as the content creator or my clients, you need to give an answer that tells the person everything, every step in the answer. Because they're not,
don't cut it.
right, because they're not in front of anything with a screen. They're just using their Google Home. So I think that would be insightful. And that's just sort of my little mini rant on.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Yeah, send that to John Mueller.
I will. So, and I didn't even make the connection. Your name is Alexis and it's an Alexa skill, but I wanted to ask you
She's
about.
so mean to me. Like she's 3 now. So
I wanted to ask you about Alexa skills. What are they exactly? How could they be used for marketing or branding when it comes to Alexa skills and voice? Yeah,
definitely. So an Alexa skill is something that anyone can build out. And I actually had just built one out. And one of the really cool things about it is that it has to go through a certification process. So someone is actually manually reviewing it and they'll send you back exactly the errors, every single documentation. They're very, very detailed at Amazon, not surprisingly. But one of the best uses of how it could be used for marketing or for branding is probably what Mayo Clinic is doing. And so they basically have a few skills, but one of their more recent skills is their first aid skill, where essentially you can basically ask that particular skill by going to Alexa, and Alexa, you'd say like, hi Alexa, open Mayo Clinic First Aid app and ask these particular questions. But you can ask it questions like, how do I treat my baby's fever? Tell me about spider bites, tell me about burns or whatnot. And just having that information available and having that additional touch point where consumers are gaining a relationship with the brand, I mean, that's invaluable, putting you on the map, which is pretty cool. And obviously they've done stellar things with their integration with Google and the medical knowledge graph. But just being there for the consumers when you need them, it just creates so much more brand awareness and that a relationship. I mean, like, can you imagine being in a situation where, actually I was in one the other day where my niece was smelling one of those scented candles that have those little bubbles in them. And she actually drank some of the water that was in the bottom.
Oh no.
She smelled like cinnamon for 3 days straight. But my sister had called the poison number because she was really nervous about it. But just having Alexa there and asking her hey, is this okay? What should we do? What do you do if your kid has poison? How do you fix this? That's a very scary situation to be in. And then to have your brand associated with that, it's very powerful.
Very powerful. So are all Alexa skills these sort of question and answer thing that can be asked at any time, or are there different types of Alexa skills besides that?
I think for the most part, they're informational. Alexa actually has some really cool GitHubs built out. So there's the one that I used was the how-to. So that was obviously question oriented, but I haven't seen any of the consumer facing ones now that you mention it, buy this, buy that. But on the Alexa certification, they do ask you if you're going to have ads or if you're going to sell products. So I guess theoretically it's a possibility. However, that would probably be a way more complicated infrastructure to build out.
Sure. So that's one that you said you built out an Alexa skill there.
It's very simple.
Yeah.
Very simple. Anyone can do it. Very simple.
Do you actually record your voice to do that? Or how does that, I've never even used an Alexa, a little confession there. So how do you do that?
I think the most complicated part about it is so have you ever used Amazon web servers?
I have not.
So you have to set up your model. So your database is set up on your own server, right? And they say, all right, well, if you're doing this and you're building your own server, why not just build it with Amazon, right? Which is really cool. And Amazon's super cheap. So you have to build out on a AWS Lambda your particular logic for how Alexa responds to particular things. So if you can think about it, it kind of looks like a JSON file. Mm-hmm. And it has, there's some I think it's a Node JavaScript in there is the one that I use. You can use a few different languages, but they have that on the Lambda. And then on Amazon's developer site, there's like a separate side where you record the intents and the different items. So like, for instance, in the how-to example, they have basically 20 ways of say how to build, how to craft, how to make, and they outline all of those. And then they fill in that item with how to make a blank, how to make a, whatever you want to say, a coffee cup. And those coffee cup, that's basically like a variable. And then you have to build out all those variables. So it's not necessarily like impossible for something that's really simple, but it's something that compiles really quickly and can get much larger as you scale more. Because let's say, for instance, with Mayo Clinic, if it can answer like 100,000 questions, you have to outline like every single one of those responses, which is like insane to think about. It's not like there's like, it's not like a search engine where you're pulling from different places. It's like you literally have an answer programmed in you for how to respond to what is a spider bite.
Okay, I want to chat about structured data a little bit.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to something you tweeted, and I did just add this to the show notes. Hopefully you had a chance to see that. You tweeted about, and I'm going to read it here, a structured data social experiment. You say, question, what happens when you combine multiple markups, OGP, Open Graph, schema, JSON LD, Twitter cards? Which markup prevails on social media? So I guess your experiment is you're just throwing all the different types of markup into a page and seeing which one wins, which one the different places choose. And so what happened there? I assume this is an experiment maybe you ran or somebody at Merkle ran. What were the results of this?
Yeah, so this year I was trying to look at like what like really excited me, what I wanted to do, and one of the things that I thought was like I really enjoy like doing like these little tiny experiments that maybe are quirky or different, or just like maybe not super complicated things, but things that maybe inspire further discovery. And one of them was actually inspired by a question that came to our tech team, and essentially I thought it was really interesting. But basically, the idea was that they had multiple different types of markup, and they were wondering if in Pinterest they would compile, like they would just merge together, which I thought was really cool. So for this particular experiment, what I did is I took a page and I just put a ton of markup on it. I mean, like it had everything. It had Facebook, it had Twitter cards, it had, when I say Facebook, I mean Facebook Open Graph protocol. It had some JSON on it, some microdata. So there's actually some content that's on the actual page. And I was just kind of went through all the different tools and saw like what did they actually pull in. And there were a few surprises there. So I thought that was pretty cool. I actually didn't know that for Facebook, whatever is the canonical OG URL, that's where it actually pulls the OGP from. So you could have OGP on your page, but if the canonical URL points to another page, it'll pull from that page no matter what. So like that canonical OG, I thought was like a really fascinating find for me at least, which it makes a lot of sense because like why would Facebook pull from the non-canonical URL? Like, which is pretty cool. And
for surprise, you say something about Google or Google Plus was completely unexpected. What was that?
Yeah, so I had in the page some JSON LD earlier, and I was expecting, like with Google being so, having promoted JSON LD so much that would probably be the first thing that would pull in, but they actually pulled in microdata, which was like random in the page and later. So I thought that was just really weird and quirky.
And by pulled in, where were you checking to see where they pulled the information in from?
Yeah, so all the different markup, all of it was different markup. So like when I actually shared it via Google Plus, it shared that particular stuff, which actually Jarno Van Driel, I hope I'm saying that right. He's really well known, on Twitter and in the industry for being very into semantic search. He pointed me to a study that Aaron Bradley had done, who's also like super famous for semantic search. And he had actually done a study which he had like single markups on a page. And I thought it was also very interesting that if you have only Open Graph on a page, that Google will pull that in. So it's kind of weird though, if you have multiple markups, the random thing that it's pulling in is microdata, but if you only have OGP, it'll pull in that. Kind of like weird and quirky,
Yeah, that is interesting. I wonder if the microdata is being pulled in just simply because it's so closely like physically in the code to the content itself. I almost just wonder if that's sort of what Google's doing there, is they're just like going straight to the content first. And then where does LinkedIn pull in from?
LinkedIn pulls in from Open Graph Protocol. And actually, the one thing that was really interesting was like that they actually pulled it in a very consistent order, which some of the other social tools didn't like cascade normally. They just kind of pulled from random different elements, which was kind of weird and quirky as well. But LinkedIn almost had like the most logical approach to it. Like if you had a consistent Open Graph URL property, it just basically pulled from that, like in order.
And Pinterest did something kind of surprising as well. What was that?
Oh gosh, Pinterest. So Pinterest just smashes everything. It's like chaos over there. Like just smashes all the different markups together, which is actually probably why. So in Pinterest, if you have structured data markup, you have to like apply for it. You basically say like, hey, like, can I apply? Yeah. And you have to go through and confirm what you have. So they probably know that it's a little bit messy. But yeah, it was also very unexpected. So I thought it was kind of like a little cool experiment. So hopefully people got something out of it.
Yeah, you have a takeaway tweet here. What's kind of the overarching takeaway for this little experiment you did?
Yeah, so in terms of Open Graph Protocol, make sure that that's on. Like make sure that your Open Graph OG URL is correct. Because if you're pointing somewhere else, that's what's going to show up on Facebook. Right. Which like for major brands, like that's a huge deal. Like let's say you like accidentally pull in an Open Graph tag from another site and your developer doesn't update that or something, your social site would be pulling in from somebody else's, which is kind of funny to think about from like pedagogical purposes, but not very funny to think about from like an actual purposes.
Right.
Google Plus is using microdata or leaning on that, which is very weird, but I'm sure they'll update to JSON LD eventually, but just to be aware of that, which is pretty cool. Pinterest is kind of a mess, so make sure that if you do anything on Pinterest to make sure that you're actually applying for stuff, because you're already doing it anyway, so why not? And they actually, in their documentation, don't say that they use JSON LD, but it actually appeared in the actual, when you actually go to approve it, which I thought was really interesting.
Huh, interesting.
Yeah, and then Twitter just uses Twitter summary cards. So like, pretty simple.
Yeah,
pretty cool.
Twitter's kind of
pretty intuitive. They do what they say.
Right.
Thought.
Twitter is actually the most straightforward scenario. In this case, they seem to mess up everything else. Their ads and everything, like they're so terrible at so many other things. Their product features.
You can't edit tweets, but you can add summary cards. So,
So speaking of tweets, I want to chat for a minute about another tweet where you talked about supporting paid search with structured data. And so I don't do anything at all with paid search, but I'm wondering, can you fill in here sort of what this tweet is talking about?
Yeah, definitely. So if your client uses Merchant Center, or if you're friends with someone on an SEM side, they have to update product feeds. And one of the ways to make this a little bit easier, essentially, is just having your client make sure their site is updated with product schema, with offer schema nested within that. And for that, if you update the information on your site, you can basically just refresh it. So in the Merchant Center, it always has the most up-to-date information. So they don't have to update it from a different source, and everything can be really consolidated.
Huh, interesting. Yeah, like I said, most of that honestly just went over my head because I don't do anything with the Merchant Center. So I'll link to that. And for anybody that does work with Merchant Center stuff, you can check that out. I'd never heard of it, so it seemed interesting.
Yeah, definitely.
So I want to chat for the last 10, 15 minutes about using AMP in developing countries. And actually, AMP is another thing that had a huge announcement in the last week or two. Yeah, you're nodding your head. What was the new announcement from AMP recently?
I'm assuming you're talking about the URL.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I guess everyone now in search is familiar with the fact that if you have an AMP URL or you're in the AMP carousel, that it shows up with www.google/AMP and then your URL, which is like kind of a bummer because, you go out and you create all this content and then Google I don't want to say they necessarily take credit for it. And I remember back in, I think it was October of 2016 at Braided Share Conference, Miley Owen was talking about it, and someone had asked that question, like, why is Google's URL showing up here? Like, what is going on? And she had mentioned back then that it was a bug that they were trying to fix. But yeah, so it's finally, they're fixing it. So that's cool. So now your URL will actually show up.
I believe they're fixing it mid-2018. So you'll be able to use your own URL for AMP URLs.
Yeah, mid-2018 is going to be like the jam. We're going to get rid of like escape fragments.
Right.
And we're going to get our own AMP URL. Like, And like by that time, like the mobile first index will officially be out,
I know, lots of things changing. So, but I think AMP in general is interesting. And you have another good article on Search Engine Land about using AMP in developing countries. And I'm curious because AMP, I think, is a big opportunity in general, depending upon the situation. Yeah. It's not right for everyone, but what's the huge opportunity about using AMP in developing countries? Where's the opportunity there?
Definitely. So for this piece, I was looking at what is going on with the infrastructure in foreign countries in terms of their internet and networking infrastructure. The growth of mobile devices, which is brought up many of times, one of the best studies that comes out every year, Molly Meeker's study, talks about that in developing countries, there's a huge explosion of mobile growth every year. Possibly because of the affordability, the growth of the internet, as well as the size of websites. So like this entire website obesity crisis that we've been having for so long. And a lot of times you got to imagine that the people at Google and Paul Backus, who created AMP, were kind of looking at all these different things that were happening and was like, how are we going to solve this? And really there's only like a few ways that you can do that. And I think it was really creative and clever. They were like, all right, well, let's cater to every single audience that we need. We'll have like the best user experience that's with this blown up code and this blown up stuff. And then we'll have like this lighter experience that offers speed and agility. And I think for developing countries, it's particularly important, especially when it comes to information, because I can't imagine what it would be like if you had, I think I can imagine it. I think almost all of us can imagine it, because if you've been on a slow connection, you can imagine how frustrating it is to want to have a certain information and have to wait for it. And then to imagine that happening with every single resource that you're loading, I mean, that's just insane to think about. So the whole idea behind the article is that like, if you're operating off of a 2G network all the time, you have to go through this non-stop. So how is it that if you're going to be this big brand that's in major first world countries marketing the best user experience with all this information that people in third world countries need, they're operating on a 3G network, trying to load that experience in with just the data that they have of their phone provider? Like, that's just not going to cut it. So that was kind of the idea behind it, that the infrastructure there is still not where it needs to be, but we need to get our customers and our audiences information as soon as possible. So how can we balance all those conflicting things? And AMP is just one of the potential solutions. Implementing some of the ideas and clever hacks that AMP has is also a potential solution as well.
And it's actually an opportunity for brands and companies, right? So like it's great to help other people access content that are on slow connections all of the time, 2G, etc. But if your market share is in these places of the world, I mean, you said it perfectly, is that, you want to you're supposedly providing a great user experience for your customers, and you have to think about where your customers are everywhere. And that brings me to my second question here about this is, I like how you describe empathy as something that you have to see and feel. And a situation where empathy applies is this scenario here, thinking about AMP. So getting super detailed, why was the word feel chosen? Was this carefully chosen, and why?
What other verb would you use?
For empathy?
Yeah.
I think you probably wouldn't. Maybe sense emotion. I don't know. I think it probably is the best one. And I'm sort of hinting here a little bit too, because a lot of people throw around the word empathy and they think it means sympathy. They interchange it with sympathy. So why is empathy actually the right thing to apply in this situation? Why can't we just intellectually think about, well, the pages need to load fast, and so let's make that happen?
Yeah, I'm so excited that you asked this. So I think empathy has a very logical and emotional component to it. And I think sympathy has a very it's just kind of like you said, it's this feeling of like not truly connecting with someone. It's just like, I feel sorry for you, but I don't really feel that. It's like kind of like a detached thing, which is why I definitely like empathy more, because there is that emotional component to it. But I do think that at some level, we can't feel what someone else is feeling. Like, I can never feel what someone in a third world country is going through, but I can make logical guesses as to what they may be feeling based on what I've felt before. And based on those feelings, and it's almost like a data collecting thing, because like I'm taking my experience and connecting it with what someone else may be feeling, and then going back and seeing what they're actually feeling by asking them those questions. And one of the concepts on this article that I think is really important is making sure to test. So seeing if this is the right experience for your user. So this is a feeling that you are aware of. You know that having slow internet connection sucks. You know that your experience is slow. Testing some AMP pages and actually seeing how those users are connecting with that experience. So taking that logic and taking those emotional components of it and that initial data set, and then testing that hypothesis and seeing whether or not it turns out to be a more engaging and interactive experience.
It's an important thing that I think we should all do with keyword research. It's not search volume. It's a human being typing something, trying to solve a problem. I always think when I think search volume, like something I automatically translate that to in my head is like human beings searching. And I think trying to look at this as people and not just numbers is it's something I try to make a habit of. And I think it's something we can all make a habit of. Speaking of that, you show a trick using Chrome DevTools, which actually can maybe help arrive at this sort of empathetic side to things. So what is this trick for checking speeds and different connections?
So if you're not naturally empathetic, you can force yourself to be.
Yeah.
So Chrome DevTools in their networking panel, obviously Chrome DevTools being like the most amazing tool on the web. No, I'm just kidding. One of the most amazing though, and useful. In the network panel, if you go to the far right-hand side, there's a little caret. And if you click the caret, there is an option that says disable online, which you don't want to do because you obviously want to stay online. But you can slow down your network. You can do a slow 3G, or you can create a custom. So for instance, you know what your customers are already going through. You can go to custom add and add a 2G network. You can actually even add a custom profile where you say, like, what are the download speeds, what are the upload speeds, and what are the latency? What's the automatic latency?
Very cool. That's a really great way to feature. Easily test things on your user's speed. I've never used that feature, and I definitely will. Yeah. So just
a hidden gem. They have so many.
I know. I feel like I've only dealt with 2% of what you can do with Chrome DevTools.
I'm sure that's all of us.
Sure. For the last few minutes, let's just chat real quick about your content, kind of doing a hard right turn here and kind of like shifting gears a lot. I noticed that you have been creating a lot of content. In fact, from the time that I invited you to be on the show and to this actual interview, I mean, you've probably had like, at least 4 or 5 posts. I don't know exactly how many.
It takes so long.
Yeah, you've had a lot of content come out is the point behind that. But what I'm wondering about specifically is if people go and check out your posts, you have a lot of kind of clever and fun images in them, which makes them unique and stand out. So I'm wondering, how do you come up with those? Is it you're just kind of like, these are things that you like? I'm just curious, how do you come up with these images and fun angles to your posts?
What a great question. All right. So I guess I'm a visual learner to start off with. I think actually a lot of people are. And it's even in that saying, like a picture's worth 1,000 words, that if you can describe something with visuals or describe something in an interactive way that's kinesthetic for people, they'll just connect with it more. They'll just innately be able to learn something or get something more from the experience. So I think kind of like at the peak of like connection, that's always the goal, to create the visual that like people see and are just like, I got this. Like, this is obviously what she's trying to say with her words, maybe not so eloquently.
And the example would be in your on-crawl article, which is a very technical article. The leading image is, and you have to forgive me, I'm not familiar with this show.
10 Things I Hate About You. You haven't seen that movie?
Oh, it's a movie? What is the movie?
10 Things I Hate About You.
Maybe.
Classic rom-com.
Yeah, maybe I've seen it at some point. But you're basically showing this picture of Joey holding up 2 photos of himself, and I think he's asking which one looks better, maybe to his girlfriend or a friend or something. And it's sort of you're drawing an analogy between what's happening here in this funny image to duplicate content. And it's actually really it's like the perfect metaphor for it, because it's not like 100% duplicate content match. The pictures are slightly different, but they're duplicate enough.
Yeah.
And that's really what duplicate content is on the web. It's like something duplicate enough where it really like should be the same, like 1 page and not 2, or canonicalized or whatnot. So that's one of the images that I'm asking about here.
Definitely. So when I was in high school, I had this SAT mentor that was like just like this really like, he was cool, but he was kind of like a savage, like he was tough. But one of the things that he told me that like always stuck with me was he's like, there's two ways to teach people things. You either traumatize them or like make them very upset, which is like not a great way to teach, or you make them laugh. And that's always stuck with me. And I think that if you can achieve that visual of like, oh, that's what it is, like make them laugh and make them connect with things. And I'm not a super funny person, but I sometimes try to be a little bit more humorous with some of the posts because it keeps it fun. Like SEO is so fun. And like you said, there's so many analogies out there that just like connect with people and make sense. So why not go for those things that like automatically connect with people and give them a different way of interacting with the information, the data that they're seeing.
So I want to ask real quick about speaking. I know you've given a few talks in the SEO world, correct?
Actually, my first are coming up.
They're coming up. Okay. Because I think I found you on, are you speaking at PubCon? I'm
speaking at SMX West and Brighton SEO.
Okay. Oh, it's Brighton SEO. One little sneak trick I do to research guests for the show is I look at speaking agendas. Speaking agendas, yeah, other. You have
so many good tips. Like we should, like I said before, we should totally do a podcast about yourself and your research.
I need to do that. But one thing I saw is that there's a lot of stuff about Toastmasters on your LinkedIn, and so is this the Toastmasters that I'm thinking of, which is to learn about public speaking? Is it actually useful?
Yeah, I definitely think that any sort of public speaking opportunities, regardless of you're going with Toastmasters or even just like daily conversation, learning how to consciously speak eloquently is really helpful in the end. And Toastmasters is really like kind of like a ground zero to practice and try things and have someone critique you, because oftentimes like someone's not going to tell you that you said 70 times or said so 30 times or have like weird verbal tics. Usually most people are kind of glaze over that and say like, it's not really a big deal. But it's kind of a really good opportunity to get that immediate feedback where people say, well, you said this 7 times, or you said this in a way, or you did this really effectively, but this wasn't as good as it should have been. And I think having that immediate feedback is so useful. So even if let's say you're a specialist or even a manager, I think it's really useful to ask someone else that's on any call that you're on for immediate feedback afterwards, because that would essentially serve the same purpose, that you would be talking and you'd be saying things and you'd be getting that immediate feedback still. But if, for instance, you don't feel comfortable with that, I definitely recommend Toastmasters, because it's just a place where public speaking, which in and of itself is a skill set that needs to be honed and reworked and evaluated often. It's just like practicing any sport. You kind of practice and you hope that on the game day you'll do well, but I mean, you never know, but you just practice so that you're more confident in that skill set.
I think it's a good point, is actually public speaking skills can apply to consulting, podcast interviewing, to just trying to convey an idea, I think. And a short little hack to getting better at that is, now that I've recorded like 87 episodes of my podcast and videos and etc., if you record yourself and listen back, you're going to hear all of those ums and ahs. And, I know when I'm doing it, and that's sort of the frustrating part, is as I'm hearing myself talking, because I've listened to myself talking so much on recording, it kind of short wires your brain, because I'm judging myself as I'm talking in real time sometimes. But
and it's crazy how just that awareness alone helps so many people. We had a Toastmaster at our work, and one of the things is that you'll notice from the first session that there's like 40 ums or ahs, or just these weird verbal graffitis that don't really add a lot to the conversation. And then about 6 months later, you realize it's just totally different. Like people are just being conscious of it and knowing that people are thinking about that, it automatically just makes it so much more simple.
Yeah, and I recommend recording your consulting calls if you're a consultant, or anything that you do where you're talking, record it and listen back. Yeah. That's one weird side benefit of some of the video episodes I did, is I actually recorded myself consulting, and then I watched it back, and I'd be like, should not have said that right there. Like I could have said that.
You're so brave, though.
Yeah, it is a very, you need to have a very thick skin when it comes to your self-confidence if you're going to do that.
Yeah.
So just as we wrap things up, I want to ask you about the Merkle SEO tools. What is technicalseo.com?
Yeah, so technicalseo.com is a site that's largely a product of Max's work. So Max Prin, you can check him out on Twitter at Max8. And it just basically has a ton of free tools and resources for anyone to use. Some are our most popular, and I actually use almost all of these on a weekly basis, are the robots.txt tester tool, which allows you to basically input a URL and show whether or not the robots.txt allows it, which is super useful because sometimes things can get really complicated with robots.txt logic. And it's a really good second checker, which I think is useful. The fetch and render as any bot, that's a really cool tool because it allows you to see what those bots are saying, which is invaluable. The mobile first parity tool, so it allows you to compare what's going on desktop versus what's going on mobile and see if there's any differences there for the mobile first index. My personal favorite is the schema markup generator because I had a very small role in it in creating it. So, but that's basically like, it's kind of like you have like word blanks and you can insert your own information, and from those values get a markup that's completely done, and it kind of guides you along the process a little bit more. So it's a little bit more hand-holding than what Google's documentation does. And then we have a lot of bulk testers. So if you are interested in mobile friendliness, but don't want to go through the mobile friendly testing tool, we pull from Google's APIs, and you can see that. Same thing with the AMP validator. And
these tools are all free, correct?
All of them are free. Yeah, none of the data is like collected. So like, for instance, if you're working for a major company, there's not any data being sent to like our back end that says, oh, today Starbucks used our tool,
Yeah, that's
so
good.
That's kind of cool too. And also like, you're never going to have to like sign up for emails or anything, which I know that like, from my experience with SEO tools, I always feel like I have to sign up for emails, and then I never actually get to the actual tool because I'm like drowning in emails trying to like confirm things. But it's just literally just free, useful tools that you can use at any time.
So as I'm fading the music up here, tell us, again, the two conferences or anywhere you'll be out there in real life that people can meet you, or where people can follow you and say hi online.
Yeah, so you can follow me online or message me, DM me on Twitter at Alexis K. Sanders, and I'll be at SMX West as well as Brighton SEO speaking about structured data.
Excellent. Well, Alexis, thank you so much again for joining me today. On Experts on the Wire. I'm going to fade the music up here, but thanks everyone, and we'll talk to you next time.